Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Nishit Kumar, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's maritime sector has scaled new heights and contributed to boosting trade and commercial activities. Pakistani army contradicts Prime Minister Imran Khan's remarks, accusing America of hatching conspiracy to topple its government. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar speaks to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ahead of India-U.S. 2+2 consultations. Indian Minister Piyush Goyal reaches Melbourne on a 3-day visit to Australia, holds talks with Australian Prime Minister's Special Trade Envoy for India, Tony Abbott. In Sri Lanka, at least 40 lawmakers walk out of the alliance amid growing unrest over an economic crisis. In sports, Indian boxer Sumit advances to semi-finals of Thailand Open. Indian women's hockey team defeats Malaysia 4-0 in their last Pool D match of FIH Women's Junior World Cup at Potchefstroom in South Africa. And in IPL cricket, Rajasthan Royals set a victory target of 170 runs before Royal Challengers Bangalore at Wankhede Stadium in Mumbai. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said India's maritime sector has scaled new heights and contributed to boosting trade and commercial activities. A report.
In his message on National Maritime Day, Prime Minister Modi said that in the last 8 years, his government has focused on port-led development, which includes expanding port capacities and making the existing systems even more efficient. He said waterways have been harnessed to ensure Indian products get access to new markets. The Prime Minister said that while government is leveraging the maritime sector for economic progress and building an Atmanirbhar Bharat, adequate care is also been taken to ensure the marine ecosystem and diversity is safeguarded. India celebrates National Maritime Day on April 5th to commemorate country's first merchant sea voyage in the trading world. The day is observed yearly by the Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. The day is celebrated to show gratitude to the men who spend many months at sea carrying out the bulk of India's trade and commerce at a global level. The theme of the 59th edition of the National Maritime Day 2022 celebrations is Sustainable Shipping Beyond COVID-19. Abhishek Mukhopadhyay for World News, All India Radio.
Pakistan's army has contradicted Prime Minister Imran Khan's remarks, accusing America of hatching a conspiracy to topple his government. According to a media report, the military leadership said there was no evidence of interference of US in Pakistan's internal matters. Express Tribune reports that, contrary to claims by Prime Minister Imran Khan, the military leadership had told the National Security Committee (NSC) meeting on 27th of March that they had no evidence to suggest the United States had threatened or was involved in the conspiracy to seek the ouster of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) government. On March 27th, the high-powered National Security Council (NSC), headed by Pakistan's PM Imran Khan, met to discuss the diplomatic cable which the PTI government claimed contained evidence of the US plot seeking a regime change in Pakistan. Meanwhile, the country's Supreme Court has adjourned till Wednesday the hearing of case filed by the joint opposition over rejection of no-trust motion against Prime Minister Imran Khan. During Tuesday's hearing, the court ordered the government to present minutes of the proceedings in the National Assembly after the no-confidence motion was presented. According to Pakistan media reports, the Election Commission of Pakistan has expressed its inability to conduct general elections within 3 months. It has cited various legal hitches and procedural challenges as the reason.
The government of India has blocked 22 YouTube-based news channels for spreading disinformation related to India's national security, foreign relations and public order. The Information and Broadcasting Ministry has also blocked 3 Twitter accounts, 1 Facebook account and 1 news website. Talking to media outside Parliament, Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Singh Thakur said out of 22 YouTube channels blocked by the government, 18 were operating from India, while 4 were from Pakistan. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar on Tuesday spoke to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ahead of the India-U.S. 2+2 consultations. In a tweet, Dr. Jaishankar said they discussed bilateral issues and latest developments pertaining to Ukraine.
Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal held talks with Australian Prime Minister's Special Trade Envoy for India, Tony Abbott, in Melbourne Tuesday evening. Mr. Goyal reached Melbourne on Tuesday on a 3-day visit to Australia. His visit comes after India and Australia signed the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement (ECTA) last Saturday. In a tweet, the minister said, "It was a pleasure meeting Australian Prime Minister's Special Trade Envoy for India." Mr. Goyal said, Mr. Abbott played a key role in realizing the ECTA. They held a discussion how both the countries can build on this deal to increase supply chain resilience in the Indo-Pacific region. During his visit, the Commerce and Industry Minister will hold wide-ranging discussions with his Australian counterpart, Dan Tehan, on carrying forward the ECTA. He will also interact with business leaders, Indian students and Indian diaspora in Australia. In Sri Lanka, at least 40 lawmakers walked out of the alliance amid growing unrest over an economic crisis, according to parliamentary proceedings. According to media reports, MPs from parties aligned with Mr. Rajapaksa's Sri Lanka Podujana Perumuna SLPP-led coalition said that they would now independently represent themselves. It comes as the South Asian nation is grappling with power cuts and shortages due to an economic and foreign exchange crisis.
In Sri Lanka, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has initiated action to temporarily close down its embassies in the Kingdom of Norway, in the Republic of Iraq and the Consulate General in the Commonwealth of Australia with effect from 30th of April. The move comes after a recent decision by the Cabinet of Ministers. A statement issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the decision was taken by the government of Sri Lanka following careful deliberations. The statement added it is part of a general restructuring of Sri Lanka's diplomatic representation overseas undertaken by the Foreign Ministry in the context of the current economic situation and the foreign currency constraints faced by the country. And in today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka. In conversation are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
Sri Lanka is facing an economic crisis with long queues in front of petrol stations, a steep rise in prices of essential commodities and frequent blackouts. Although the COVID-19 pandemic precipitated a crisis of trade imbalance, the fundamentals of Sri Lankan economy have always had serious issues. Now we have seen anti-government demonstration continuing in the capital city of Colombo. Several protests are taking place in different parts of the country against the current Rajapaksa government. A large number of protests gather on Call Road in Colombo and raise slogan against the government of the island nation. Ambassador Sajjanhar, why do you think suddenly Sri Lanka has gone to this state?
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Thank you for your introductory remarks, and it's a very important question. As you have said yourself, Sri Lanka has been facing an economic crisis for quite some time, and this is not this making is not of immediate developments. It has been brewing. It has been in the works for quite some time. I think if as far as the recent economic crisis, which is really mentioned as the worst economic crisis to have hit Sri Lanka in its history, I think in more recent times one could go back to the April 2019 bombings that took place in Sri Lanka in Colombo, in which more than 250 people were killed. And we need to keep in mind that Sri Lanka earns about 10% of its GDP from tourism arrivals, most of them coming from UK, from India, and some other countries. So it lost a large number of tourists as a result of that. It was not seen as a very safe destination for people to come and spend their holidays, and so that had a very serious impact. We also need to keep in mind that before that, from the 1980s till about 2009, when we had the LTTE problem and the Sri Lanka Tamils, and there was this civil war that was raging in the the country, the tourism had taken a huge hit. Even exports had taken a huge hit. But coming to this 2019 crisis, so the tourism took a very bad hit. And even before it had an opportunity to recover, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic. So travel was completely restricted, and even as far as exports are concerned, they were very seriously restricted. So the foreign exchange reserves of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government, which were to the tune of about $7.5 billion when he took office in 2019, they plummeted to about $2.5 billion in the middle of last year, and by November they had come down even further to $1.7 billion. So number one is the huge, very rapid depletion of foreign exchange. Number two is that Sri Lanka depends on imports for a large number of commodities, whether it is fuel, whether it is medications, whether it is transport equipment, it is pulses, lentils, sugar, you name it. Sri Lanka imports all these from outside. And since it did not have the money to buy all these, to import all these items, so there have been shortages, there have been fuel shortages, and Sri Lanka has been appealing to other countries, particularly to India and also to China, for getting this money. Of course, there have been some suggestions that it could go to the International Monetary Fund, but then there have been voices coming that getting money from some other sources would be preferable. So this, I would say, is the genesis, the huge balance of payment crisis that Sri Lanka faces, because its demands are many and its exports and revenue earnings, either through tourism or exports of tea or rubber or textile, they have come down very severely, and that is what has resulted in all these shortages of fuel, of food items, and hence the protest demonstrations that are taking place in the country.
Ambassador, you explained the current situation with Sri Lanka. So basically it's a problem of balance of payment crisis and financial mismanagement. We have seen food supplies, getting dried up because of lack of foreign currency to pay for imports. I think Sri Lanka last time had a similar problem was in 1974 when food had to be rationed and people had to stand in line for rice, tea, sugar and other essential items. But the difference between 1974 crisis and this time is that at least last time Sri Lankans were able to grow their own food if necessary. But in 2020, along with the foreign exchange crisis, Sri Lanka is also facing a fertilizer crisis which has left the country struggling to grow its own food. How will that impact for the common man not having enough food? That's a very, very dangerous sign for the country.
No, you're absolutely right, Sanjay, because if you look at the macro situation as far as the Sri Lankan economy is concerned, its per capita GDP is not very small. In fact, it is much higher than India's. It's about $19,000. Its total GDP in purchasing power parity is about 400 odd billion. So for a population of about 21-22 million, it's a good GDP. But as you said rightly at the beginning, it is primarily mismanagement of the economy, financial mismanagement by the government, particularly over the last 3 years. And I will also say that it is mismanaged of the agricultural policy, because you would recall that Sri Lanka had recently prohibited the use of chemical fertilizers because it said that it would transition to the 100% organic farming and organic production. Now that might look very good on paper, but it has its huge risks and dangers, and the production gets reduced by half, and then of course there is also the problem of hoarding of food items by the food mafia. We have seen it in earlier years in other countries also, that whenever there are shortages of any item, they are hoarded by the unscrupulous traders and elements in the society. And that is exactly what has happened in Sri Lanka, resulting in huge shortages of food items, food riots taking place, something which you very correctly said had also happened in 1974. But at that time, the Sri Lankan economy was definitely not as well developed as it is today, and they were able to grow some of their items. But today, the Sri Lankan economy is so hugely dependent dependent upon imports of many of these food items, food products. And the fact that they do not have their own domestic production has suffered because they also had the problem of import of this fertilizer from China, and that proved to be of very poor quality, and it was rejected. It was not used by Sri Lanka, and that has also caused this huge food crisis in the food sector, which has led to food shortages. And even as far as food rationing is concerned, what was mentioned that even as far as corn is concerned, it should be rationed in a manner so that it is given only to those who need it the most, like pregnant mothers. They should be the ones who it should be rationed to them. So similarly, there are so many other items. And of course, we have seen also the case of diesel and fuels, because the sole refinery in Sri Lanka, that has to be closed down because they have not been able to import the requisite quantity of the crude oil for refining there, because they don't have the foreign exchange. So I think the situation is very dire, and as a result of that, we saw that all the 26 ministers of the cabinet, including the Prime Minister, they resigned on the 3rd of April, just 2 days ago. We also saw that the younger brother of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, he was the finance minister, and he was sacked on the 3rd. And there was another finance minister that was appointed yesterday, Ali Sabri, and he has also resigned today. That means his tenure has been just about a day. He was the justice minister earlier. So the point I'm making is that both at the political level as well as at the economic level, the country, Sri Lanka, is unfortunately going through very dire times.
Sri Lanka is going through a dire time. We have seen the crisis in Sri Lanka affecting India badly because they are our neighbor, and we have a sort of linguistic, religious connection with some part of Sri Lanka. And there are many people who are saying that India should help Sri Lanka during the crisis and also resolve some of the bilateral issues. Primarily, we have seen the debt, both domestic and foreign, has been a major problem for Sri Lankan economy. And even 2 years back, hardly after they took over the charge, the Rajapaksa as a president, his elder brother, Prime Minister Rajapaksa, came to India, asked India to reschedule the loan. Sri Lanka also has a huge debt from China. China has reportedly refused to respond to Sri Lanka's appeal to reschedule its huge debts, and its ambassador to Sri Lanka had said that his country was keener on considering a further $1 billion loans and 1.5 billion credit line. What is the way out for Sri Lanka? How will they tide over this crisis?
So two very important points you have made, Sanjay, and let me quickly respond to both of them sequentially. One is as far as India is concerned. I think India is trying to help to the maximum extent possible. In an interview, the leader of the opposition, Sajid Premadasa, he has appealed to Prime Minister Modi to help Sri Lanka to the maximum extent possible. And I would like to say that India is helping Sri Lanka in the best manner that it possibly can. You would have read, and all our listeners would also have read this news report which appeared a few days ago, in which there was a tweet. One of the hospitals in Sri Lanka had said that they had stopped certain treatment and certain operations, certain surgeries, because they did not have enough medication. Now, suo moto cognizance was taken of that tweet by our External Affairs Minister. He expressed grave regret and sadness at this state of affairs, and he said that he had instructed our High Commissioner Gopal Bagle in Colombo that he should immediately contact the hospital and make sure that all assistance is accorded. So I think this is, I'm just giving a specific case, but at the macro level also, we have been not only rescheduling our debt because Sri Lanka owes a lot of debt to India, also to Japan and to China in a very big way, maybe possibly the largest amount to China. We have been rescheduling our debt. We have been providing more funding, more resources to Sri Lanka to meet with its import requirements, its import demands. We have been providing it with fuel. Just very recently, we provided another tranche of 40,000 metric tons of diesel. This was the fourth tranche out of the 200,000 metric ton of diesel diesel. This is a $500 million oil line of credit that has been extended by India, because fuel is something that has really troubled Sri Lanka in recent times, because it has not only in terms of transportation but also providing energy and providing electricity and lighting to the people. It has helped in that.
Thank you very much for your time and explaining the situation in Sri Lanka, Ambassador Sajjanhar.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates around the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to World News. At the United Nations Security Council UNSC, India has condemned the killing of civilians in Bucha, Ukraine, calling for an independent UN inquiry. Speaking at a UNSC meeting on Ukraine on Tuesday, India's permanent representative to the UN, T.S. Tirumurti, called the reports of civilian killings in Bucha town as deeply disturbing. Mr. Tirumurti said India continues to remain deeply concerned at the worsening situation and reiterates its call for an immediate cessation of violence and an end to hostilities. He said India continues to emphasize that the global order is anchored on international law, the UN Charter, and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of states. Mr. Tirumurti said diplomacy must prevail as the only viable option to end the Russia-Ukraine crisis. He said, keeping in view the dire humanitarian situation in Ukraine, India has been sending humanitarian supplies to Ukraine and its neighbors, which include medicines and other essential relief materials. U.S. Defense Department has approved the sale of 8 F-16 combat aircraft to Bulgaria for $1.67 billion. America's Department's Defense Security Cooperation Agency in a statement said that proposed sale would improve Bulgaria's capability to meet current and future threats by enabling the Bulgarian Air Force to deploy modern fighter aircraft routinely in the Black Sea region. On the other hand, the United States stopped the Russian government from paying holders of Russian bonds more than $600 million from its reserves held in U.S. banks.
China on Tuesday reported more than 16,500 new COVID cases recorded over the previous 24 hours as the country grappled with ever highest new COVID cases, mounting frustration, and new substrain BA.1.1. Shanghai, a city of 25 million currently under a citywide lockdown, reported more than 13,300 new cases, mainly due to BA.2. A United Nations-backed panel of climate scientists warned in a news report released on Monday that the world may be on track to warm by more than 3 degrees Celsius, twice the Paris Agreement target, in a change that would painfully remake societies and life on the planet. A report.
The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change comes after years of net zero pledges by national governments, cities, businesses and investors, and it sounds a stark warning on the still unchecked emissions of greenhouse gas emissions, pushing to record levels. Greenhouse gas pollution must peak at the latest before 2025 to keep the targets alive, warned the IPCC scientists. Based on national pledges made before last November's Glasgow climate negotiations, emissions in 2030 would make it likely that warming will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius during the 21st century, the authors conclude. Scientists in recent years have reduced the likelihood of much higher increases, and the report makes clear that solutions are available or foreseeable in virtually in every sector. There are cost-effective carbon-cutting opportunities that together could meet half the 2030 emissions target. At least 18 countries have proven that it is possible to reduce greenhouse, in some cases up to 4% a year, and potentially in line with a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise. Solar and wind costs fell 85% and 55% between 2010 and 2019, making them now cheaper than fossil fuel powered electricity generation in many places. Carbon-free and low-carbon technologies, including nuclear and hydroelectric power, made up 37% of the electricity generated globally in 2019. Transportation, which causes 23% of carbon dioxide emissions from energy in 2019, is poised for a change, with battery prices dropping 85%. So there is still hope to keep the earth alive for the future generations.
Ravi Kumar for World News.
Indian pugilist Sumit put up a dominating performance to enter the semi-finals of the Thailand Open International Boxing Tournament in Phuket. On Tuesday bout, Sumit comfortably secured a 5-0 win over Kazakhstan's Timur Nursetov in the men's 75 kg last 8th round. However, another Indian boxer, Gaurav's campaign ended after losing to Kazakh opponent Aybek Oralbey, who is the 2018 Youth Olympics champion in the 91 kg category. Indian women's hockey team defeated Malaysia 4-0 in their last Pool D match of the FIH Women's Junior World Cup at Potchefstroom, South Africa on Tuesday. That's the end of the group stage for India, who have won 3 from 3 and confirmed a spot against South Korea in the quarter-final. The 4-0 win over Malaysia had a brace from Mumtaz Khan on either side of goals from Sangeeta Kumari and Lal Rindiki.
In IPL cricket, Rajasthan Royals have set a victory target of 170 runs before Royal Challengers Bangalore at the Wankhede Stadium in Mumbai. Chasing the target, Bangalore were 118 for 5 in 14.3 overs when reports last came in. Put into bat first, Rajasthan posted 169 for 3 in the stipulated 20 overs, riding on Jos Buttler's unbeaten 70 runs and Shimron Hetmer's not-out 42. For Bangalore, Harshal Patel, David Whaley and Wanindu Hasaranga took 1 wicket each. Earlier, Royal Challengers Bangalore won the toss and elected to field. In badminton, World Championship bronze medalist Lakshya Sen and fast-rising shuttler Malvika Bansod entered the second round of the singles competition at the Korea Open tournament in Suncheon City. While sixth-seeded, Sen defeated Korea's Choi Ji-hoon and seeded Bansod stunned world number 24 Han Yui of China. Sen will next meet Indonesia's Sesher Hiren Rustavito, while Bansod will face sixth-seeded Thai Ponpovi Shoshovong in the second round.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Let's take a look at the press reports on China. Xinhua reports State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a phone call with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on Monday. CNN reports Shanghai, which is grappling with the record number of daily COVID cases, has become the biggest and potentially costliest example of China's insistence on adhering to its strict elimination strategy. Now let's have a look at what made headlines in Nepal. Kathmandu Post, in an opinion piece by former Nepal Commerce Secretary, writes that Nepal's trade deficit with China has been growing at an unprecedented rate over the past decade. Khabar Hub reports that chairman of the CPN Maoist Center Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachandas has visited Baluwatar to meet Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba after the latter's 3-day-long India visit. Now let's have a look at the press reports on Pakistan. According to the Dawn, workers of the PTI on Monday besieged a hotel here in Gulberg where hundreds of PMLN MPAs were staying besides the disgruntled lawmakers of the ruling PTI ahead of the crucial election of Punjab Chief Minister scheduled for Wednesday. The Pakistan Observer reports that Pakistan Democratic Movement PDM Chief Fazlur Rahman said that the opposition can move towards elections once the constitution has been upheld in the country.
Now let's have a look at the press reports on Balochistan. According to the Express Tribune, the Chief Justice of Pakistan has said that the cases of enforced disappearances attracted terrorism laws and were tantamount to treason during hearing of a case about the recovery of journalist and blogger Mudassar Naro and other missing persons. The Balochistan Post writes that 3 persons were killed by Pakistani forces in Washuk district of Balochistan last Saturday. The Balochistan Post reports that a Baloch youth went missing from Zehri area of Khuzdar district. Now let's have a look what made headlines in Bangladesh. A police inspector has been withdrawn over a Facebook post mocking the ongoing protests against the harassment of a college teacher for wearing a teep or bindi, reports Daily Star.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's maritime sector has scaled new heights and contributed to boosting trade and commercial activities. Pakistani army contradicts Prime Minister Imran Khan's remarks, accusing America of hatching conspiracy to topple his government. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar speaks to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ahead of India-U.S. 2+2 consultations. Indian Minister Piyush Goyal reaches Melbourne on a 3-day visit to Australia. Holds talks with Australian Prime Minister Special Trade Envoy for India, Tony Abbott. In Sri Lanka, at least 40 lawmakers walk out of the alliance amid growing unrest over an economic crisis. In sports, Indian boxer Sumit advances to semi-finals of Thailand Open, and in IPL cricket, Rajasthan Royals set a victory target of 170 runs before RCB at Wankhede Stadium in Mumbai. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite version, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Tanzania. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.